All right, my friends, a quick video on when not to do Roth conversions. Now, you know I love Roth conversions, but there are times, more than you think, when it doesn't make sense to do it. I'm going to share with you an example of a couple I talked to last night. Essentially, what's going to happen is, in their current structure where we left off, they're going to pay basically $13K in taxes this year, $13K next year, say $14K, $14K, and $15K. All right, they're going to pay a little bit amount of taxes. He's 61. I think she was 60 off the top of my head. I can't remember. But they're going to pay when he retires. They're going to pay 13. Because he's got a good pension. I can't remember what else. But anyway, they're paying about 13K to 14K over the next 5 years. Fast forward in the future, they'll probably start paying 20 when they got to start taking required distributions out. 22, 24, something like that. All right, so the consideration is when you have a big fat pension, it's awful. You're not going to, and this is why I talked to a lot of military personnel. He's not a military personnel, but the same thing happens. It's hard to do the much tax planning in the golden years of 62, 63, 64, because that pension is going to kick in, and when it does, it's just your gross income is just it's just tough to get around that. Does that make sense? So if you start doing Roth conversions when you already have a big pension, in his case it's pretty big, and so we're going to start doing Roth conversions. It's going to put him into the 22% bracket, as opposed to if he just did his pension with his Social Security, leaving him right there at the 12% bracket, if that makes sense. So if we got taxes 26, 30 as we go forward, as his RMDs increase, all right, his taxes increase too. So the alternative would be to basically take all these taxes, push them over here, and then reduce these taxes over here. Now, if we could just do it as a one-for-one, that's great. But if you ran the taxes in this case, what happens is this low tax rate doesn't really kick in until well down the road, say 15, 20 years. So essentially what we're doing is we are converting, in this case, the deferral is valuable because he's not paying these bigger taxes until 15, 20 years. So what we would do if we did Roth conversions is we make these bigger taxes payable on the front end and hope on the back end that we don't have those significant taxes. And I'm just not a big fan of that. Now, we can make an argument that, hey, his wife will get less tax and all that too. The issue here is we're not really anticipating a huge a portfolio left over when he dies to leave to his wife. It could be, but she's going to have a pension and his Social Security at the delayed earnings credit, so she's going to be just fine. So the issue is we're not really anticipating a significant amount of RMDs for her as a single taxpayer once he passes on, simply because they are doing some pretty aggressive withdrawals from the portfolio to maintain their lifestyle. I don't have any qualm with that, because I think actually when all is said and done, when we fast forward in the future, they're not going to withdraw nearly as much as what any software would show you that says, hey, you're going to withdraw, $100,000 the first year, then $103,000 the next, $107,000 next. I don't believe that for 2 seconds flat. But if we start paying the tax up front, then it might be that we have no other option other than paying less tax in the well into the future. But it could be the fact that we pay the tax up front. We've now exhausted our portfolio because we had to find the money to pay the taxes from someplace. Does that make sense? I'm not a big fan of doing that. I don't like the idea of exhausting your portfolio, which isn't all that. We have a good chance of not outliving our portfolio, but anytime there is a some kind of probability that you could outlive your portfolio, I don't like reducing the portfolio to pay taxes, to pull these taxes up front, when if we just have a limited tax on the front end that will probably make the portfolio last longer. I mean, this is worst case scenario, but that will also give you more control of when you want to pay the tax. Does that make sense? Because you can say at the end of the day, hey man, our RMDs are $10,000 this year. Maybe I'll take $40,000 out as opposed to 10, or whatever you want to do is based on the tax code at the time. I hope that makes sense. I just don't like pushing significant amount of money forward in that way. So basically, these are the taxes he'd pay when he's 80. These are the taxes he'd pay when they're 60. If we did it the other way, he'd pay these taxes at 80 and these taxes at 60. It's still a pretty significant tax rate. And so so essentially he's losing, $150,000 of taxes in the first, 5 to 10 years of their retirement as a 60 going on to a 70. When I think that money is better deferred. And the reason is because we got that pension. If we didn't have that pension, I wouldn't mind paying $13,000 a year for the first 5 years in order to pay no taxes in the future being 70. But in this case, because he has a pension, he's always going to have 5 figures of federal taxes, always. So we're saying low 5 figures to mid 5 figures. I'd rather have the low 5 figures on the front year to defer paying the mid 5 figures in the back, as opposed to having the mid 5 figures on the front end, hoping that we'll have the low 5 figures in the back. Either way, he's paying these in taxes. If we can do it alternatively, where we say, if we do this and we front load the tax man today, there is no tax left over to you or your surviving spouse when you're 78 years old. Or hell, 72 years old. And we can't get that here simply because the pension and the Social Security is not going to happen. And so all we're doing is we're saying we were in the 12% tax bracket, now we're going to put us up in the 22 or 24% tax bracket even. I'm just not a fan of doing that. The Roth conversion stuff is really... The best time to do it is when you don't have a pension. Now, having a pension in itself isn't what will not make the difference. It's how big your portfolio could possibly be in the future. In this case, it varied because of the Monte Carlo scenario. Sometimes So because there's not a big portfolio in the future, potentially, and because the taxes are still going to be high regardless of what we do, I just don't see a benefit of paying that kind of tax up front as opposed to deferring those kind of taxes in the future, and they may never happen. Whereas if you do the Roth conversions, the taxes will happen, and it really could hurt the portfolio in the future. Does that make sense? I know it's kind of confusing, but that's my take on that. So don't just blindly follow my own lead of saying Roth conversion for everybody. There's a lot to do on that, a lot of contingencies on that, and you really need to run the taxes first and foremost to see, are we really doing ourselves any favor by the taxes by basically paying today as opposed to in the future? And in many cases, the answer is no. That probably doesn't make any sense, but that is one reason not to do the Roth conversions. We'll see you.